Welcome to this new session of our doctoral seminar series. My name is Dominique Somda. I'm a researcher at HUMA, the Institute for Humanities at the University of Cape Town. The seminar is recorded. It will be uploaded on YouTube later on our YouTube channel. It's going probably to be also streamed in a few minutes. As always, we are asking participants to please include their full names in this Zoom room. And as always, also, if you don't, you might find yourself placed in the waiting room temporarily. In the doctoral seminar series, we invite our guests to reflect on the challenges and strategies of doctoral work, with a particular focus on turning points and critical experiences that shaped their research journeys. But also, we are very interested in different methods and concepts. Our speaker today, Émilie Guitard, Dr. Émilie Guitard, will lead us on the traces of the sorcerer. We will explore how to combine oral and material data on ethnographic fieldwork. She shared with us a text that you can find on our UMA page. The text is entitled "Between Municipal Management and Sorcery, Uses of Waste," and it gave us some indication on how to combine those two things, material data and oral data. So I'm very, very happy to introduce you to Émilie. Émilie is a very good friend. We met probably, I think, 15 years ago. I'm not too sure of the date, but I remember that the context was a seminar, a political anthropology seminar at the University of Paris-Nanterre. And you invited me, and I'm very happy that finally I get to invite you back. Like it took a while, but I've done it. Émilie is now a permanent researcher in anthropology at the French National Center for Scientific Research, the CNRS in France. She studies the relationship to nature in several cities in sub-Saharan Africa, in Nigeria, in Cameroon, and also in Zimbabwe. On the field, she combines ethnographic research, methods from ethnosciences, and collaborations with artists to understand waste management practices in line with relation of power, local knowledge about urban biodiversity, and also the way that the role of nature is defining urban identities, and the place given to plants in city governance and in the area of the sustainable city. That's a lot. That's a lot. And more recently, and I know that's something that is very dear to her. She has been developing a reflection on artistic production featuring Africa and urban Africa in particular, with a focus on the imaginaries of African cities in the future as expressed in speculative fiction. So Émilie Guitard, we are very, very lucky to have you today. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And I would like to thank also Angélique. I don't know if she's connected, but for this, and Yuma, of course, for this invitation that has been postponed, and it's my fault mostly. So I'm really happy finally to be here to deal with you all. And as always, I will be too long, so I will start right now, not to spend too much time. And I will share so I share the screen, maybe?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's do that. Up. So I hope it's working for you all. It's okay?
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect.
Right. So today, as Dominique mentioned, I will look at the necessity and the ways to combine data on speeches and representations on one end, and data on practices and materiality on the other hand, as they can be collected notably during ethnographic fieldwork. So, because indeed a researcher in social science can limit himself or herself to what people are saying, captured by simply asking them. But it's problematic for most of the research topic in social science for several reasons. So the first one is that discourses and narratives are giving access only to the representations of a phenomenon by a certain type of people. And of course, these representations can differ widely from the complex reality of the phenomenon studied. Also, people can assure the researcher that they are doing things in certain ways and actually act in a totally different way. Two other reasons are that people can have difficulties to verbalize what they are doing, believing, or feeling. And of course, the fact that the researcher's person, because of, his age, gender, origins, socioeconomical status, behavior, etc., is always influencing what people are telling him or her. So it's important, I think, as a researcher, to pay attention also to the non-verbalized practices, the special arrangement of or the objects being part of a specific material culture, to capture other aspects of a social phenomenon left unaddressed by people discourses. The idea being to highlight the discrepancies and gaps between what people are saying and what they are actually doing, or to anchor their speeches in more concrete data. So today I will start by some theoretical and methodological reflections on the necessity to combine oral and material data, and on some specific methodologies you can mobilize for a great variety of research topics on various fieldworks. And I will try not to be too long on this part to save time, to keep time, to give you a specific example of research topics for which some researchers pleaded for a better place given to material data along with speeches. That is the question of witchcraft or sorcery. And to do so, I will present briefly a scientific debate initiated in France in 2017 on the materiality of witchcraft, together with my own personal experience of research on this theme in connection with waste management in Cameroon when I was doing my PhD research. Oh, no, it's not moving. Okay, let's try like this. Great. So, as I said frequently, there is a focus in social science research on discourse, narratives, and representations that are collected through interviews, questionnaires, focus group discussions, etc. But as Jean-Pierre Varnier, who is a French anthropologist I will mention a lot today, so as he underlined, I'm quoting him, anthropology and social science are generally speaking imbued with speech, notions, and form of verbalized knowledge, which means that for many researchers, it seems to be enough to have access to the representations, the verbal descriptions of a social phenomenon as it is elicited by the actors themselves. However, sorry, okay, I will move to the other slide. However, as it has been noted by many researchers, this focus only on discourses can lead to what Jean-Pierre Varnier calls the Magritte effect, after the name of this famous Belgian painter, Magritte. And I quote again, the surrealist painter Magritte once produced a series of paintings representing a smoking pipe. Under each representation of the pipe, he wrote, "This is not a pipe," as you can see on the slide. This is true and untrue at the same time. You cannot stuff tobacco in a painting and light it to inhale the smoke. What you can do is to hang it on a wall. If you want to smoke tobacco, you need a real smoking pipe, not its representation. So this expression, the Magritte effect, is used here to qualify the confusion between a thing and its representation, and it's underlining the fact that when you are asking people to describe you an object, a practice, a place, or a social phenomenon, they will just give you access to their perception or representation of it and not to its materiality. Also, as I said earlier, everybody's actions are defined by several sets of norms, values, or objectives that are again determined by their origins, the religion, the socioeconomic status, the gender, the age, the profession, the political affiliations, etc. And these sets of norms are often contradictory. And you have also to choose or to combine these norms, values, or objectives for each daily action. So because of this, people tend often to say things and do others. And because sometimes it's because they want to avoid to tell you as a researcher what they are actually doing, so as to confer a more rewarding image of themselves, for instance. But also often it's because they have difficulties to verbalize what they are actually doing, feeling, or thinking. And when I say they, it's actually, of course, everybody, the researchers included. That's obvious. So it's necessary to develop methodologies to identify these gaps and discrepancies between narratives and actual practices. Also because they speak volumes about the tensions, the contradictions, or the conflicts animating the social phenomenon you are studying. So a solution might be to collect and analyze discourses and narrative, but also to take into account the actions and the material elements of people's daily life, that is to say their practices and material culture. In Varnier's words, we need as researchers to consider the pipe together with the picture of the pipe, that is to say the material culture and the practices, notably involving the body, I will come back to that later, together with the representations of what we are studying expressed through speeches. In this regard, Varnier is pleading for ethnographic research more focused on the interactions between people's bodies and the material culture. That is to say, how people are actually manipulating objects to an extent where they embody these objects, and where they are becoming parts of them as many prostheses included in their corporal synthesis. Varnier is also suggesting to capture this close relation between body and object through what he calls a praxeology of the sensory motor conducts. That is to say, a very thick and detailed description on how people are interacting with objects through their bodies on a daily basis. And that's what he did. I will maybe come back to it in the discussion. Over almost 30 years spent in several villages of the Mekong Kingdom in Western Cameroon. And he described this very long research in his last book, The Pot King, The Body and Technologies of Power, in 2007. So another set of methodologies developed in this regard regarding materiality have been developed, in the 60s. By several researchers, again, who started to discuss this tendency in social science to collect data simply by asking and quoting them, mostly through questionnaires and interviews, forgetting that the data gained through elicitation are shaped by the interaction between researchers and researched. So these researchers worked on defining other methodologies that they coined unobtrusive measures. And sorry, but some of them are WebMD, for instance. So these unobtrusive measures were made to gather data by means, I quote again, that do not involve direct elicitation of information from research subjects. These methodologies were said also to be non-reactive because presumed to avoid the problems caused by the researcher's presence. And more specifically, what was interesting for me in my PhD research is that these researchers advocated that social scientists should devote more attention to sources of data such as physical traces, non-participant observation, and the use of documentary sources. And I quote again, experience, attitude, and belief might be addressed just as effectively by watching what people are doing, looking at physical evidence of various kinds, and drawing on the written as well as the spoken voice as they are by interviews or questionnaires. Also with a lot of humor, they give several examples of unobtrusive measures. So for instance, sorry, I'm going a bit too fast with the presentation, but so just to give you some examples, they mentioned, for instance, the use of wear on the floor tiles surrounding a museum exhibit showing hatching chicks to measure visitors' flows. That are some example of traces. Also, the size of suits of armor as an indicator of changes in human stature over time, or another one that is very specific, the length of a matador's beard before a bullfight or a corrida, betraying his level of anxiety with the idea that the closer he shaves, the less stressed he feels. And these researchers have also defined several principles governing the use of unobtrusive measures. The first one, as you can read here, is to construct and impose multiple indices that converge, That is to say, capture the complexity of social situations through the use of multiple theories and multiple methods of research, producing multiple sources of data. The idea being, don't stick to one specific theory, methodology, and type of sources in your research. Second one is to assume noise is rare, meaning that much of what we see around us can be considered as a potential source of data, and that they should not be discarded out of them, even when at first sight, they seem to be trivial, perplexing, or out of the ordinary. Another one, investigators believe in amortization, meaning that data, no matter how they are generated, can have more than one purpose and can be put to more than one use. And the last one, my favorite, which is foolishness is functional, meaning that researchers might be able to reflect on research problems and methodologies in an imaginative, playful, or even fanciful way, and in any case with humor or even self-mockery. And I'm trying to apply this last principle throughout my research since I started as an anthropologist. So in all these sources potentially considered by adepts of unobtrusive measures, Webb and al. Mention also erosion data, meaning physical remnants of or traces produced by erosion on the environment. Of course, we have to keep in mind that this data can't be really used on their own, and I will come back to that regarding my own research, to document relations to specific things. But commented by informants, they can actually confirm or infirm what they are telling of their practices, or at least make them talk more precisely on them. Also, you can pay attention to the traces of addition to specific things that Webb and his colleagues will call rather accretion measures. But, and this is my transition to the second part of my research, while studying physical traces, you can also unveil much unexpected phenomenon, like it happened to me in northern Cameroon while I was studying waste management. To give you a concrete example of the necessity to study together speech practices and materiality, we can indeed look at a controversy started by Varnier again in 2017 regarding what he called the Magritte effect in witchcraft. In a paper published in Politique Africaine, that is a French journal, Varnier expressed some concerns about the fact that many researchers in Africa are studying witchcraft and sorcery by focusing only on narrative and discourses about it, through rumors and suspicions, notably as they are relayed by the mass media. And that's why I took this excerpt of a Nigerian newspaper about this very famous case of the snake that swallowed a lot of money in the GEMB office, that is the board for admission and matriculation. It was in 2016, I think, or 17. So, as I said, researchers regarding witchcraft were focusing on narrative and discourses, forgetting to look also for more concrete evidences like objects or bodily practices. And for Varnier, it is not only scientifically insufficient or even biased, but it's also dangerous, as it might contribute to justify these discourses on witchcraft by giving them an academic label. And this leads abroad to the strengthening of many stereotypes on Africa at the heart of darkness, where everything is thought as based on occult practices and representations. But it can also lead locally to dramatic events like the frequent mob killings of people accused of being witches, for instance. Yet, of course, Varnier admits that, I quote, "Once rarely meet a witch only when one is confessing his or her misdeeds, in order that the discourse on witchcraft is almost the only thing accessible to the researcher." But still, for him, there is at least one tangible and intermediary element between the witch and the rumor, that is the witchcraft crisis, striking a subject, affecting him in his body or possessions, provoking among his immediate entourage a surge of anxiety, etc., etc. And you could observe that kind of crisis, for instance. Also, more generally, Varnier is pleading for a true sociology of witchcraft in Africa, where could be combined narrative and discourses, notably as they are relayed by mass media, but also by the researchers themselves, the practices observed during notably witchcraft crises, and quantitative data that is quite difficult, as he agrees, to collect. And for him, it would be then possible to identify, for instance, a cognitive dissonance between the rarity of actual witchcraft cases, because for him, for instance, in 45 years spent in Cameroon living and doing research, he witnessed only 3 crises. So a cognitive dissonance, as I said, between the rarity of those crises and the importance taken by witchcraft in the media, in the success of Pentecostal preaching, or in the social science. So generally speaking, the idea here is to deconstruct this Magritte effect on witchcraft. Then, in the following issue of Politique Africaine, 6 researchers debated Varnier's controversy. And the debate is still open today, since these researchers all agree on the fact that witchcraft is definitely an elusive research object, because it's multiple and polymorphous, and it's present all over the world, sharing common global traits, while being highly influenced by the specific context where it is observed. So it's not a phenomenon by essence, but it's something attached to very specific events. It's part, obviously, of the occult, the unknown, the night, the hidden, while paradoxically, most of these researchers insist on the fact that it is today maybe even more than when Varnier was in Cameroon, even invading all the stages, social, economic, religious, etc., stages composing the daily life for many Africans. That is to say, everybody is speaking about witchcraft, but it always stays intangible. And the last thing, and that's what makes actually witchcraft a very efficient and powerful element in the social life, that it is occult, difficult to grasp, and so impossible to objectify, and mostly based on different kinds of discourses, more than on concrete things the ethnographer can actually observe. So it's a borderline object for social science, and most specifically for ethnography. In this regard, all agree also that at least it is recommended as a researcher on witchcraft to do an ethnography on discursive practices with a lot of care and reflexivity. But the debate stays open, as I said, on whether it is actually possible to collect material data, notably quantitative, regarding witchcraft or not. So in this regard, I was quite surprised and quite happy to discover that Julien Bonhomme, who is one of the French specialists of anthropology of contemporary witchcraft in Africa, mentioned in this debate a paper I just wrote on municipal management and sorcery uses of waste in 2 cities of northern Cameroon. And that's the paper I shared with you today. Actually, it's quite funny because this paper was written with the data collected during my ethnographic fieldwork for my PhD on waste management and relation of power in this context. And it was not supposed at first to be at all addressing the question of witchcraft or sorcery. So actually, 2 things happened to me on the field. The first one is that while observing how city dwellers of Garoua and Maroua were worked, manage their domestic waste on a daily basis, I noticed that they were giving specific attention and care to the bodily excretions like nails, hair, menstrual blood, etc., but also to discarded things which have been close to their bodies for a while, like clothes. For instance, they were recovering the placenta after a woman gave birth at the hospital to bury it. In the courtyard of the compound, they were collecting nails or hair after cutting them to bury them, burn them, or throw them in the latrine pits inside the compound again. They were washing the menstrual pad to recover the blood and pour it again in their latrines, burning the underwear, etc., etc. Also in the compounds, there were at least 2 latrines, one for the family and one for the visitors, or even in polygamous households, one for each wife and their children. Also, when I asked people why they were so careful with their bodily waste, they mentioned, of course, hygiene, purity, and restraint, especially because we were in a Muslim and Fulani context, mostly. But they also mentioned almost systematically the fear of seeing their waste recovered by some evil-minded people. And that's why I shared with you this Facebook post on Ibadan, this time in southern western part of Nigeria, because it's actually the same discourse we can have here, so it's not very specific to Cameroon. So they were afraid that some evil-minded people could use this waste remotely against them through sorcery practices. And this concern was even stronger for the local elites, most of them Muslim and Fulani of high rank, fearing that for their political positions, to an extent that until 2011 at least, when I left northern Cameroon, the traditional chief of Marwa, the Lamido, kept all the domestic and bodily waste inside this large compound in a pit to avoid sorcery recovery. In the meantime, as I was also doing observation on several old and large trash piles in Garoua, I started to collect narratives by citizens. Sorry, and I will make a zoom on these details, material details. So I collected narrative by citizens, notably those living close by, about maraboutic manipulations realized on old and large accumulations of waste to gain power or wealth, but also for evil purposes. And for instance, many people referred to specific evil spells called karfa to be buried in old trash piles to separate people united by marriage, blood relations, love, or friendship. Several times also, some of my interlocutors showed me some specific elements of on accumulation of trash. And like here, for instance, you can see a broken calabash, pieces of cloth, notably red pieces, chicken feathers, etc. They showed me also decoctions in plastic bottles, etc. And they all identify these elements as remains of occult practices. In this context, when big waste heaps started to develop in the public spaces of Garoua during the 90s and 2000s, because they were not collected anymore by the municipal authorities, it was also perceived by the inhabitants as increasing the sorcery threat. And they had actually to wait for 2008, when waste started again to be collected by a new private company, leading, according to some of my interlocutors, to the multiplication of weddings. And at first, when no lady told me that, when I came back to Garoua in 2008, I didn't understand at all why, what was the connection between the collection of waste piles and weddings. And actually, she explained that the bad spells meant to separate people and buried in the waste heaps have been removed by this new company collecting waste. That led actually to the multiplication of weddings. So finally, to conclude, again, and I will stop on this last slide. This specific case shows, as Julien Bonhomme notes, that I'm quoting, speaking of sorcery or witchcraft is not always speculating on some metaphysical backstage world. It can be also a way to study more mundane reality. And I would add that in this specific case, this approach of witchcraft through material elements and practices, namely waste and waste management, in my case, still limited me to discourses and representations of people on witchcraft, since I still needed their commentaries on their practices to understand which meaning or justification they were giving to them. And it seems to be the only way for the moment to capture a social phenomenon so difficult to objectify, notably through material evidence. But it is showing at least that witchcraft is not just about representations and narratives, but also have very concrete impacts on people's daily life. And to say one last word, I would say that this case shows also very well that it's important to combine discourses and material data for a proper analysis as a social scientist, and not to focus only on one type of data, whether oral or material. And I will stop here, hoping that I have not been too long. My dear Dominique.
What are you talking about? You are not long at all. You are very, you don't know how long people can be.
Okay. Let me stop the sharing of the screen, maybe.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we will open the conversation. And I will start with, I noted that in an interesting wording, you mentioned borderline objects, and I think you said that witchcraft was one of them. Can you, in your experience as an ethnographer, have you encountered other objects that you would compare to witchcraft in, in that particular, that would have that particular quality of being like borderline, as you said?
Yeah, I think that I took this concept of this word of borderline from what I read actually in this, special issue on this question of materiality or witchcraft. But of course, I totally agree, and it's borderline regarding materiality. But, and you will think I'm giving back the floor to you, but I was thinking today that what you did during your own research for your PhD on secret and secret memory of slavery, if I might put it this way, was also a type of borderline subject regarding materiality. So maybe you could say a word
back to me. No, but it's true that those also, as I was, okay, I know your research, and this was not a discovery when I read your article, but like when you were discussing like the traces and and it reminded me of what I was discussing about the traces, the material indicators that exist in the landscape that are not the entirety of the phenomenon, but that lead you to more questioning, to suspicions, and to another kind of knowledge. So there's certainly like a way to compare those things that just appear in the reality as signals for something else.
I was just thinking also another thing that is interesting, I think, regarding my research is when, for instance, Varnier and all these people, because actually he gathered a small group of researchers on in a collective they called Matière à penser. And I shared another paper, more recent paper with you, I think, written in 2020 about that. But anyway, they are really insisting on this question of the connection between the body and the objects or the material elements. And actually, if I look at it closely, the first way I learned or I heard of these questions of sorcery, but also forces, living on big accumulation of waste like genes or genies, etc., was where I was myself with my own body involved, but I mean connected to these trash piles, because actually I was doing what one of my supervisors suggested me to do, that is a transect. It was inspired by a transect in botany, when actually you decide like you define like a corridor of 1 meter wide or even more, and you count each meter or each 2 meters all the species you find in this corridor. So I tried to do the same on trash piles to identify the content of trash piles. So I was spending a lot of time with a colleague, a Cameroonian colleague, bent on the trash pile and counting, okay, that's an old plastic bag, that's an old pen, whatever. And one day I stayed there at noon, and it was very hot because it's northern Cameroon, and I think I got a sunstroke. So I got ill for 2 or 3 days after this event. And the people in the family where I was living told me, but that's normal, you got sick. And they told me it's not because of sun or anything, it's just because at noon, that's the time of the day where the genes are really active in the compound, in the trash piles. So if you are on the trash pile at this moment, they will obviously do something to you, hurt you or anything. And so it's actually at my own expense and through my own body that I learned I heard of these things. So I don't know if I answer to your question, but I think that's interesting. And it's also put an emphasis on this question of the reflexivity and the involvement of the researcher on this field, also regarding materiality, etc., and these narratives around witchcraft, this borderline narrative phenomenon.
And also what you're adding just now is also the dimension of temporality, that like the trash pile doesn't have the same value, doesn't have the same danger, like depending on the time of the day, and that it's more or less active, and the way you interact with it, the way it reveals something to you through others and through like people warning you, also depend on those dimensions of temporality, and it's not just a special quality of the place.
And it's actually a quite common narrative, and it's not attached specifically to the trash pile, but it's attached to the forces or the more than humans, you could say, living in these trash piles. And it's interesting because I find the same type of narratives regarding trees in Ibadan, where I work now for almost 6 years. Because again, like the trash piles, and it was the same actually in northern Cameroon, these trees are said to be inhabited by forces more than humans, etc. And they are active, more active at certain times of the day or the night. That is mostly noon and midnight, and sometime at dawn or at dusk, you know. And so people will say, and I guess they do it more or less. Again, you have to observe it closely. That you have to be careful when you pass by a trash pile or a certain type of trees at this time of the day or the night, because it might be dangerous for you because of these forces. So it's interesting.
No, it's fascinating.
And I try to be careful as a researcher, because regarding observation of practices, there was another tricky thing for me, and it's the same with the trash pile and the trees, that I can't observe actually those practices said to be done, these maraboutic practices said to be done on trash piles, for instance, because they were said to be done at night. So it was dangerous. It was dangerous for me in many ways to hide behind, close to a trash pile and try to observe. It was dangerous because if they were really happening, it would be dangerous for me. And also because I could be taken for a sorcerer myself, you know? So in this regard, it was not possible to observe. I think maybe some ethnographers would do it, but you have also to respect what people are believing or are saying in this regard. And it's the same for trees. I won't try to venture under some trees in Ibadan in the middle of the night, at noon, at midnight, or etc., because I know it will be dangerous in many ways, actually. So that's the limit again of this kind of suggestion to observe materiality and practices.
So I want now to, and I'm going, sorry, I'm going to volunteer or something like that to coerce like members of the audience like to take part in this conversation, because I feel that, you know, some of our doctoral fellows, such as Minga, former doctoral fellow, like Minga is now a doctor, but Minga and Nabil, for example. So I feel Minga deciding to focus on water, and he'll tell us more about that in 2 weeks, but it's probably a similar engagement with the materiality and what it leads you to discover about interaction, about sociality. And Nabil is working in Morocco in Borderlands, and also very different topic, but I think a place where you also have the materiality, the materiality of, or lack of thereof, materiality of the tombs, materiality of the traces left by a migrant that have disappeared. And I don't know if any of you would like to contribute to the discussion on what does it mean methodologically to focus on the materiality of a phenomenon.
And don't hesitate also to ask me to clarify some points, because I know that with my French, Nigerian, or French, whatever accent, I'm not always very clear. So don't be shy about that.
I'm trying to familiarize everybody to the French accent in English. Any question from the audience? Otherwise, it's just us like discussing. You know,
we can discuss in French.
Thank you so much, Emily, for your presentation. It's been really wonderful also to see you and Dominique and like your friendship, and then also your professional relationship. Remy and I have been going through texts while you were both presenting as well. I'm really curious. Thank you so much, firstly, for your presentation, and I'm really curious about the kind of the questions that you pose around methodology, and I think, I mean, I haven't started my fieldwork yet, so this is kind of thinking ahead into how much value and how do we kind of balance what people are saying with obviously the different ways of kind of collecting data in the field. And I'm curious about whether or not you feel that it's this topic of witchcraft that is kind of very, very like conceptualized very differently in different spaces, that makes it so that there's a need to go beyond what people are saying, or if it's an approach that you use when kind of researching different subject matters and different topics as well. Not sure if that question makes sense.
And I was wondering, what is your the topic you will address, Alison, in your PhD research?
So I'm looking at intergenerational skills transmission for youth in Mthatha in South Africa and youth in Akita in Japan. So it's a comparative ethnography of these two places. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm the one asking questions, but
I see you, Émilie. That's what you're doing.
No, but I don't know if or I missed something, but it was more a commentary than a question. No, Alison, what you said, or maybe I missed this part.
Alison, would you want to like rephrase maybe your question?
Sure. I guess my question was around the subject matter of witchcraft, and how whether this approach that you're saying, specifically like methodologically, wanting to make sure that you're going beyond what people are saying and going beyond discourse and really looking at kind of this kind of like physical data in that sense. And so I'm curious if you think that this approach is kind of specific to the topic of witchcraft, or if it's an approach that you use in different spaces and with different topics as well.
Yeah, sorry. Of course, no, I think I took this example because it was, as we said with Dominique, a borderline example, because it's a really tricky phenomenon to capture through materiality. But of course, for instance, I'm always trying to use this thing of combining different types of data. For instance, in the research I'm doing now on relations to plants and trees in the city of Ibadan. I'm always trying to collect the discourses, like I said, through open discussions, interviews, etc. But also I'm always trying to do like do situated observation around these trees, and to look at what people are doing around these trees, and also at the traces people are leaving. For instance, it's interesting because in this part of Nigeria, like in other parts of Africa, people are using a lot of elements from plants to treat themselves. And they have a lot of discourses about that, and you can, they can talk a lot about it, but actually there are concrete evidence of that. You have huge markets of women selling herbs, herbalists, and you have also traces of those practices on the trees in the city. Like you have traces of bark that has been collected. For leaves it's more difficult, but barks is very obvious. Also, another thing you can observe is again regarding rituals is the fact that these trees are also often associated to some orisha, so entities of the Yoruba pantheon, and that's why actually you can witness a lot of small shrines at the feet of those trees, but they are very, very difficult to see sometimes because they are more or less hidden, or they are very small, or it's just a small piece of calabash or earthenware, etc. So that's where again, and you can also witness, for instance, the offerings given by people to this orisha, like traces of palm oil or kola nut or gin, some feathers from poultry that has been sacrificed. So again, it's also, I think, another situation where you can combine these different type of data, and I think it works for a lot of cases. Your case also, not maybe not traces, but practices, and the way people are transmitting about the knowledge you are mentioning, the transmission of knowledge, or they are also transmitting some specific gesture and practices involving their bodies. I think that's something you can witness that is beyond words, and that is also very, very important, and also that is difficult to verbalize for people, because sometimes there are things you are doing with your body that you can't speak about very easily, and that's where it's interesting maybe to just observe the way people are doing things. And I will stop here. Another example, for instance, regarding affects and emotions. I'm trying also to address that kind of questions regarding relation to plants. And I know, for instance, that people are distinguishing trees depending on the shade, the quality of shade they are giving. And it's obvious. I mean, if you are under a mango tree, it won't be the same regarding shade than being under a palm tree, let's say. But it's very difficult to verbalize. It's very difficult to describe the quality of shade. So that's where maybe observe, spend time with people, and feel it yourself in your body is also a way to address this kind of phenomenon. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Émilie, for such a precise and interesting response. We have a question from Nabil. Nabil, would you like to unmute? I don't know if Nabil may have connection issues.
Maybe it's unmuted.
No, I don't think. Nabil, can you? No, it's not muted. I think it's more connection issue. Minga, I see that you had a hand raised that had disappeared, but would you like to ask your question, as Nabil is still maybe struggling with his own connection?
Yes, thank you, Dominic, for facilitating the session. And Émilie, good afternoon or good evening. Thank you for seeing me again virtually. My question is very simple. I would like to, if you can take us through your positionality in data collection, because as an anthropologist, there's always the issue of positionalities. And I think I'm trying to do the follow-up with Alison's question also. We do know that dirt can mean different things to many different people. And also scientifically speaking, dirt can be a source of energy. We can accumulate energy through dirt as well. Was there, and also dirt can also be associated with evil spirit or anything that has to do with the negative. So as an anthropologist, did you come across such a thing? And if not, it's okay, it's not a problem. I'm just trying to look at the idea of what dirt is, taking into account your positionality on issues that you did not understand as well. Because my research is based on water. I spoke a lot about my positionality in a space that was not familiar to me, and try to understand how people, what are the kind of relationships that are formed around water. And I had to bring people in. I follow water, and it was water that took me to people. And I spoke quite a lot about my position. So if there's a possibility to take us through that that phase, thank you.
Thank you so much, Minga. There would be a lot to say. I will try to be short, but actually, regarding my positionality, I would say that, you know, when I arrived in Northern Cameroon, I was a PhD student. I was also quite young. I was looking very young, I think. And, you know, I was both seen as very innocent, and if you read the paper I shared with you, people are saying there is a discussion at the end of the of the paper where someone is we are together with two other people, and someone is talking about me saying, oh, but she's young, she's really innocent. So that's why also I think I accessed to that really specific kind of discourses and narratives about witchcraft and sorcery, because I was seen as really innocent, you know, in a way. So I was not dangerous at all in any way regarding that. So people were discussing with me quite openly about that. And also, and we talked about that, Dominique, if you remember some times ago, I was learning also, you know, more and more details regarding the specific question of witchcraft, etc. And I was trying, when I discuss with people, to give elements to let them know that I knew, and that as a European or a French woman, I was not judging them on this narrative, so they could openly speak to me about it. And that's the second point I wanted to raise, is that as a French white woman, I was also seen as embodying hygiene, modern, you know, ways of managing waste, etc. So at first, people may have been a bit embarrassed to speak with me about this question of witchcraft, etc., because they may have think that I would judge them, saying that they were, you know, stupid, ignorant, credulous, whatever. So that's where it was a bit tricky for me. But in the meantime, what is interesting, and I think it's quite common in anthropology, is that I was acting very strangely for a white French woman to the people of Garoua and Marois, notably because at first I was spending a lot of time on those trash piles. And actually they gave me a nickname that was Nasara Jidere, which means the white of the trash pile. And that at first they called me that, and then some people gave me even other names, like apotropaic names that are local names, you know, referring to waste and used to protect children from bad luck. And for instance, someone called me Ajuji, that is an Hausa name meaning waste again. So it's just to say that, you know, I tried to navigate with these two identity, and you know, in the end, to access those speeches and discourses, being aware of what the ways I was seen. So well, that's the way I could answer. And just regarding the question of dirt as something positive as well, in this paper I shared with you, but there is also another one I wrote in English specifically on this topic in the Journal of Material Culture. There were actually practices in this area of the Lake Chad Basin of chiefs in ancient kingdoms erecting huge trash piles as a tool and a symbol of power, of positive power. So if I start to speak about that, I will need 2 more hours, but you can have a look at those papers because it's quite complex and very, very fascinating. And I guess that it's it has happened also elsewhere in Africa, not just in this part of Cameroon. I hope I answered again.
Thank you, you did. Thank you.
Thank you, Émilie. And what I find interesting, and I think that's also like, you know, like very common for everybody, like in such position, like of doing field work and for many years. And I know you were like returning like several years in a row. So it's the transformation that also happened to positionality. Like there's a positionality that you have when you start that is mainly the characteristic of your racial identity, your personal history, your age, your gender. And then there's also then like the additional complexity of like your own practice and the interaction that you have with people. So your own practice of being like a very I don't want to call you a weirdo, but like a
I wanted to say
a very weirdo activity of like just spending days on the trash piles, and then like and also the work that you did later. So it's a very dynamic notion that positionality is. So like it's so important in the reflexivity that we have like in our research to just add and revisit and interrogate and question how like the positionality is being also shaped by the fieldwork. Do we have more questions? I know Nabil. So Nabil was trying to speak, but I think it wasn't a question of being unmuted. I think Nabil was just not able to use his mic. Do we have more questions? Like we approach 4:58. We should wrap up quite soon, but if you have more questions for Émilie on the matter, she's here. So I'm just going. It's a moment when I'm trying to pause slightly so that there's opportunity. Okay, so Émilie, thank you so much for taking the time it just shows that you just took the time to just speak with an old friend. It felt that way. I'm in my living room, you're in your office, and we're just like, you know, revisiting a topic that we've discussed like so many times, and you know, continuing the learning with each other through each other's work, and I think that's quite lovely. So yes, thank you so much for your time. Even if you're a little earlier in Paris now. So next time we are going to have Minga that just discussed a little bit his work on water. Minga is going to be our guest on the 16th of November, and he's going to I think Minga, do you have a title? You promised me a title for today, so.
Yes, the title is very simple, and I think we brainstormed together. It's a centering water, centering Kailicha through water.
Okay, excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. The simple is always very good. So yes, please join us next for the next session in 2 weeks, and have a very lovely day. And bye-bye. I'm going to stop the recording now.